5 years passed after the agreement of Japanese military sexual slavery had concluded. However, there are still conflicts of the matter between Koreans and the Japanese government. So why do Koreans demand an apology constantly? Is it because they have anti-Japanese sentiments? Or do they just want to harass the innocent Japanese? Let's find out. To begin with, groups of women were victimized by Japanese military during the colonial era. It was an action ordered by Japanese government to relax sexual desires of Japanese troops and maintain public order.
The Japanese government installed brothels and mobilized colonial women compulsively.
According to the survey of victims registered with Korean government, female victims were from 11 to 27 years old, and most of them were swindled or kidnapped. Japan denies the compulsory mobilization of comfort women, but while it is hard to think that there were people who would dare to endure all this brutality to prostitute oneself.
이 보고서에 따르면 14일 저녁 6시 55분 중국군이 작전을 지휘한 미군에 보고한 바에 따르면 13일 밤에, 그러니까 9월 13일 밤이죠. 일본군이 성안에서 조선인 여성을 30명 총살했다고 되어 있습니다. 이 지역처럼 일본군이 전멸을 각오한 전투 지역에서는 위안부와 민간인들도 함께 살고 함께 죽기를, 그러니까 공생공사를 강요받았습니다. The resolutions of conflicts between the nation is necessary. However, Koreans' repeated request of an apology is a condemnation about a criminal act, an infringement upon human rights. Some consider the problem as a settled one because of the agreement of 2015. I think many of you have wondered why the victims changed their minds, though they had welcomed the funding according to the document above. Well, the argument that they had welcomed the money at first is not a fact. There was kind of a misunderstanding. Let's get the facts straight here. An agreement of Japanese military sexual slavery had reached in 2015. At that time, using Japanese government's budget for finance, the Reconciliation and Cure Foundation was established in July 2016. The Japanese government emphasized that the funding was not an indemnity on their liability rights. However, the victims couldn't hear the detailed explanation of that money. It was because of the poor surgery by the Foreign Office and the Foundation officials. So after knowing the truth later, the victims and the relevant groups were infuriated at the money which the meeting of apology was not included. Without any sincere apology, 1 billion yen given as a reward definitely wouldn't have been an indemnity but an insult.
Wait, do you mean that? Well, yeah, the 2015 agreement was unfortunate, and I feel sorry about the victims about that. But why not consider proceeding apologies made by Japan?
Actually, Japan had apologized about the Japanese sexual slavery before, since Chief Cabinet Minister Karo's statement, which was on 1992. It is true that Japan has apologized several times. The problem is in the content of the apology.
What the victims want is the admission of the fact that the past Japanese government had committed wartime sexual assault by mobilizing convert women compulsorily, which is war crime. Although Japan had apologized several times, they never conceded they committed war crimes in any of their apologies.
The present Japanese government argues that since their brothels were primarily run by the willing participation of women, it doesn't correspond to a war crime punishable based on international law. This is the point where the victims and Japanese government are continuously clashing.
It is being confirmed in various materials, including testimonies of many victims, the document of the Allies and the Dutch government's working paper. The Japanese military had mobilized convert women by force. Moreover, when Japanese military's confidential document stating that they needed 1 convert women per 70 soldiers was released, Japan acknowledged that it has been kept in the Cabinet Secretariat. However, despite such evidence, Abe's administration still denies the intervention and coercion of military authorities as ever. They shifted the blame onto civilians, the traders who received the army's request.
In 2016 National Foundation Day, in the House of Representatives Budget Committee, Abe answered, "An apology letter isn't contained in an agreement. Our government doesn't consider it not in the list," to the question of the opposition party that asked whether they would send apology letters to Korean sexual slavery as the Prime Minister's name. It is an attitude of forgetting the whole thing, as they finished a superficial apology.
10億円の拠出をされています。我々もっと考えていないところでございます。
Ridiculous of the peace monument symbolizing the Japanese military sexual slaves. Sakurai Makoto, the former president of the Representative Anti-Korea Association and also the leader of the far-right political party, ridiculed the peace monument by mimicking it at the art festival for Japanese. Disturbance against activities related to the victims.
お帰りください。嫌です。警告します。何が警告だよ。お前に何の権利があって警告なんだよ。
Ludicrous remarks associated with the victims. Denial of their apologies for the victims.
Japanese, even distortion history to keep denying the fact. In the 3 kinds of social studies textbook that the publisher who can publish it expression such as were comfort woman and forced mobilization were deleted. Also, the textbook
of a political economy reduced the controversy of Japan's responsibility to argument of individual victim in Korea.
Such broader history also exists in other countries. However, they are showing consistent apologies and corresponding actions to be forgiven. They educate their coming generation about their faults. They are facing their guilt and keep on apologizing.
The Netherlands.
Last but not least, Germany. German president, prime minister and so on has apologized to damaged countries whenever possible since Willy Brandt apologized for the brutality of Nazi Germany, kneeling down in 1970.
Germany hosts a memorial ceremony in Auschwitz concentration group in International Holocaust Memorial Day every year, and German representative visited there, apologizing to the victims and reflecting on the past. Furthermore, they let future generations constantly reflect on and be shamed by through history education.
To people who stand for Japan's current stance, believing they're innocent because of their previous apologies, did a single country we showed before made formal retractions of their apologies?
Do you think it's reasonable, and do you think we shouldn't be critical about it? Apology and forgiveness are not made depending on just pouring out the words. Like the countries shown above, Japan must heal the victim's mind and keep their dignity, not only by acknowledging the responsibility verbally, but also by doing continuous actions and apologizing sincerely. That is the only thing that will heal the victim's mind and draw sincere forgiveness.
The reason the victims want apology is to make sure that the indignities of the brothers will not default on themselves and to forgive Japan. Among over hundreds of victims, there are only 24 survivors now.
There isn't much time left for Japan. As we all know, facing guilt is not an action to be ashamed of. I should say it's rather novel. We hope Japan wouldn't lose this last chance to be forgiven for its past crimes. Thank you for watching this video.